Well, I finished up my last tape in telling you of the wedding. Now, in future, I shall refer to my wife as Edie, so that you'll know to whom I am referring. We didn't take any photos of the wedding, so you won't be able to see any. But I'll start off telling you the next day, which was Sunday. Well, we just carried on as usual, Sunday, as though it was any other Sunday. We started a certain way of going on. I got up first to light the fire, which was a coal fire, of course, and then a bit later on, Edie would come down and she would cook the breakfast on a gas ring. It was a new thing, that was, in those days, but it was just a ring where you could boil a kettle on, or you could fry bacon or something like that. But there was no such thing as gas ovens in those days. If any baking had to be done in the oven which was warmed by the coal fire. Well, we also had gas lighting. They put a mantle on the where the gas comes through, on the mantle holder, and you got a very good light. It was very easy on the eye. In fact, I liked it better than electric light, which came along afterwards. Well, the next morning, I had a box camera, and I took a photo of Edie, but she was just in her ordinary dress, with an apron on. She'd just been washing pots in the back kitchen when I asked her to come and have a photo taken. So that was about the only photo we have of those times, and of course it's still in the album, in the chest of drawers here. We went to church as usual on the Sunday evening, and then Monday morning was work as usual. And then when I came home in the evening, I started to dig the back garden. It really belonged to Edie's father, but he hadn't been interested in the back garden, so I decided to dig it over and grow vegetables on it. And my brother Alfred, who of course came through the war all right, he joined me in this digging over this back garden, because it was quite a big one, as big as these allotments that you see these days. So we did it between us and shared the produce. After I'd been working for some time, I decided to join the trades union which catered for my particular trade, which was the Amalgamated Society of Instrument Makers. The branch meetings were held fortnightly, and I became interested in union work. The next thing of any importance was the August holidays coming, and it was then that we had our belated honeymoon at Fleetwood. And it was at Fleetwood, where we'd had our holidays the previous summer, that we became engaged. We'd been for a look around the town while we were spending a holiday there, and we passed a jeweller's shop and had a look in the window. So we went inside and bought the ring, and that was it. And I came back from a nice holiday, and I had a bit of a shock when I went to work on the Monday morning. Although we knew nothing about it, the firm had been getting fewer orders for electricity meters and things like that. And the very first day that we got back, we were told that there would only be one week's work and then 1 week's holiday until further notice. Well, that went on. Of course, it was a bit of a knock as well as a shock, because it meant loss of wages, of course. And when we've been going on like this for a bit, the shortage of orders became so acute that all the workmen, apart from 2 in the shop, were temporarily sent home on suspension. We weren't sacked, we weren't, but we were sent home with the idea that when the work began flowing again, that they'd send for us back. Well, luckily, that happened before Christmas, and because we were wondering how we were going to go on unemployment pay, and there was no such thing as social security in those days. You just got your bare unemployment pay, which wasn't a lot, and you got to exist on that. And it wasn't very nice, I can tell you, because I'd just begun to get on my feet. I'd been drawing full wages for a certain length of time, and I got a pretty good wage, so we were beginning to feel a lot better off. And then to have this knock so soon after getting married, well, I can tell you, I didn't like it at all. Well, the next thing, of course, of importance was when my oldest daughter, Joan, was born. I can remember I'd gone to work in the afternoon, and walking home at night, I was met by his mother, who told me to go for the midwife. This midwife was a woman named Mrs. Lee, and she lived in the village of Rainhill, so off I went to bring Mrs. Lee. And I had my tea when I got in, and then sat waiting for Mrs. Lee to come. She had to walk, of course, and they didn't have cars then to go about in. And after she came and went upstairs with Edie's mother, I sat at the bottom of the stairs because she'd told. I said, what about having the doctor? And she said, oh, well, I'll tell you when to go for the doctor. So I was sat at the bottom of the stairs waiting for the time when she'd come and tell me to go for the doctor. But as I was sat at the bottom of the stairs, I heard Edie cry out in pain. I was wondering what was going on, and then I could hear a baby crying. So it appeared that this Mrs. Lee prided herself on bringing young babies into the world without any doctor. And she only sent for the doctor if it was a difficult birth and there was any danger about it. But obviously she thought everything was going on all right, and so I never had to go for the doctor, and we didn't have the doctor at all. And it was a good job, because if you had the doctor, it was 2 guineas that you had to pay, and that meant that Mrs. Lee had saved us 2 guineas by not sending for the doctor. I remember after that, I started to get after Joan was born, I started to get myself off in the morning. I used to get up and come down and light the fire, lay the fire rather. I didn't light it, I just laid it so that all Edie had to do was put a match to it. And then I'd cook my breakfast, and I'd take Edie a cup of tea, and then I'd go off to work. Well, that became the usual thing, and I carried on doing that until the day when Edie didn't need any more cups of tea. Of course, with Joan coming, it naturally made a big difference in our lives, because we couldn't go out together as much as we'd been able to do before Joan was born. But I always remember one thing when Joan was a little baby, and that was that in those days, nearly every family had a rocking chair, and we'd bought a rocking chair when we brought the rest of our furniture, because we knew we'd want one eventually. And one thing I liked to do in the evening was to sit down on this rocking chair and rock Joan to sleep. And then there's another thing, was that on Sunday morning, while Edie was getting the dinner ready, I used to put Joan in the pram, and I used to take her for a long walk while Edie was getting the dinner ready. And the strange thing, we couldn't afford a new pram at the time, so we'd had to get a second-hand one. But as it happened, I happened to know a woman who'd worked in the same shop that I worked, and of course she'd got married and she'd had a child, and she didn't intend to have any more if she could help it. She sold the pram to me second-hand. Of course, you'd have to pay about, even in those days, you'd have to pay about £12 for a new pram. I got this for £2. So we'd got to do all this sort of thing, you know. There wasn't a lot of money flying about then, and you had to look after what you'd got and make the best of it. Well, at this stage, I was working full-time again, because in order to give trade a boost, the government had decided to hold a big exhibition at Wembley. That was when Wembley was first came. Well, nobody had ever heard of Wembley before this, because it was just a small place outside London. But the firm that I work for decided to make a model electric railway and to send it to this exhibition so that foreign buyers would be able to see the kind of things that we made, because we made all sorts of things in connection with electric railways. And when this first sent us back after we'd had the long holiday, as you might call it, unpaid of course, we started work on making this electric railway. And I know my job was to make the electric engine. And this, well, that was part of it. And the train wagons and all connected with the engine, the wagons and the carriages, all those sort of things I had to make. And of course some of the other men made different. They made signal boxes and all the different things that go what they call a pantograph. That was like a trolley that was on top of the electric engine. You'll probably see them today. Well, if you ever see pictures or on television of South African railways, they're practically all electric, and we supplied, as a result of this exhibition, we got a lot of orders from them, and we supplied them with all the things for their electric railways. But that kept us going for quite a long time, and by the time we'd finished that job, the orders were beginning to come back for the ordinary electric things. And the result was, of course, that it kept us in work, regular work. And now, up to this time, we'd only made the quarterly electric meters, but they decided to start making the coin slot meters, the shilling in the slot and penny in the slot, and designed some new meters in order to do this. Well, we got one or two orders for these coin in the slot meters, and we fulfilled these orders. But after about a month or two, they began to get complaints that they weren't working satisfactorily, and we had quite a lot of these meters were sent back for overhaul. Well, when they came back, I was given the job of trying to put them right, see what was wrong with them. And after trying to put them right as in their ordinary situation, I came to the conclusion that there'd have to be some alteration in design of certain parts. What was actually happening was that when you put a coin in the slot and you turn as you turn the handle, you turned a switch which was controlled by a spring. There was a spring behind it, and it contracted the spring. Well, when you'd had your shillings worth of electricity, this switch was switched off by the spring, because there was the thing that held it back was moved out of the way when at the end of the shillings worth. Now, after trying for 2 or 3 days to get them to work right, I came to the conclusion that they would always have the same fault, because they were the switch was working, it was switching off before they'd had the shillings worth. So, and that was what was causing all the trouble. And I came to the conclusion that if a certain part, a new part was put in of a different shape, that it would probably get over the fault. So I made this new part to my own ideas, and I tried it, and it worked quite satisfactory. So at that time, at the factory, they had a scheme, what they call a suggestion scheme, where if any of the workers had a good suggestion for improving the way of methods of making things, of course all with the idea of saving money, making it cheaper to produce them, you made your suggestion, and if it was adopted, you were rewarded by a cash reward. So I put my suggestion in, and of course I'd not only made the suggestion, but I'd actually made the part and fitted it to the meter so that they could come and test it. So when my suggestion went in and they came in to test it, it worked satisfactorily, and of course that part was adopted, and as a result I got a cash reward for my suggestion. While all this was going on, I'd become more interested in trade union work, and I certainly held very strong labour views at the time as well. One of the reasons I held these strong labour views was because we were looking for a house all the time, naturally like any young couple would, and unfortunately there was none being, the only houses that were being built was the first of the council houses. There'd never been such things as council houses before the war, but they were all built by private concerns. But we were looking round for council houses, and we got really tired of looking round, and I got a bit depressed about it and a bit annoyed at the same time, because although Edie's mother was very good to us, that naturally we wanted to be in a house of our own like anybody else did. And of course it had turned me against the coalition government that it was then, and I'd begun to have strong labour ideas, in fact strong socialist ideas. And I'd also been taking a lot more interest in trades union work, so that by 1922 I was the shop steward in my particular department. Now, in 1920 rather, an amalgamation had taken place of a lot of different smaller engineering unions, and the union that I belonged to had also joined this amalgamation. And when the amalgamation was completed, it was known as the AEU, the Amalgamated Engineering Union, and it was the Amalgamated Engineering Union in which I now belonged, and in which I became the shop steward. Although we were fairly busy now and could have regular work, in other parts of the engineering industry there was getting to be a lot of unemployment, particularly in the shipbuilding part of the engineering trades. One reason for this was, of course, that under the terms of the peace treaty after the First World War, it had been determined that Germany had to supply England with enough ships to cover the number that they'd sunk with the submarines. Well, it sounded all right from one point of view, But what happened was that because our country was being supplied with these ships free, it cost them nothing, because it was all under the terms of the peace treaty. Naturally, the ship owners were buying these ships from our government because they could have them cheaper, and that meant that it was throwing our members out of work. So our union met the employers, and they wanted to draw up some scheme that would stop a lot of the overtime that was being worked, that would limit the amount of the number of hours that any man worked, so that it would give them more men a chance to get a job. And they met the employers, and they got a partial agreement, and then after they'd worded the agreement, it had all been written down so that it could be referred to. There was one clause that the union wouldn't agree to, and that was that the employers had the sole right to determine when overtime was absolutely necessary. And the union claimed the right to have a say in that, and because the employers wouldn't agree to it, and the general position in the engineering industry was now getting very bad. There was a lot of unemployed. It meant that the employers had the whip hand, and they practically told our union we could either accept work under those terms, or there'd be no work for them. In other words, they'd be locked out. And of course, there were the union leaders evidently thought they could win their case, and they still refused to agree to the employers' ideas. So what happened was that this lockout took place, and because the only money that trade union members could hope to get if they were either lockout or in any dispute of that kind, any industrial dispute, if the only money that those who were taking part in that dispute could get was the strike pay from the unions, which wasn't much, because, for instance, at that time, for a skilled man, the wages were about £4.10. The union strike pay was only £1 a week, so it meant if he went on strike, he could only get £1 a week from the union, and and once again, as I say, he couldn't go to Social Security like they do today and help them to carry on. Well, the consequences was the employers were wiser than the union, and they realised that they could beat the union. And it wasn't very long, about 3 months, they were still out, and the employers, of course, wouldn't budge, and the union wouldn't budge. And the employers were holding out because they realised they'd only got to hold out long enough and they would win. And the union used up all the funds in paying this strike payout. And at the end, when that happened, of course, they'd got to give in. And as a result, there was this conflict had gone on, and men had lost all their wages for nothing. Now, luckily for myself, the strike only applied to certain firms, what they call federated firms. That meant the employers were members of the Engineering Union Federation, and the employees were also members of the AEU. But if the employer wasn't a member of the federation, of course he wasn't affected by these things. And as the firm I was working for, the BIC, the biggest part of their work was cable, making cable and all, and telephone cable, power cables, all kinds of wire that's used in electricity. That was the biggest part of it. They employed about 6,000 men, and there was only about 1,500 in the electrical fittings department, as it was called. All the rest was on the cable side, so they were members of the Cable Makers Federation. So because of that, we weren't called out. So actually, in that respect, I didn't lose anything. But I'll tell you later on how it did come to work to our detriment. Well, the next thing that happened was, of course, when my second daughter, Eileen, was born. Well, this caused us to have to leave Edie's mother, because now, with 2 children, of course it meant that the house, Edie's mother's house, was getting a little bit too thickly populated. We required more room, and as there was no more room to be had, it meant that we'd got to start looking for somewhere else to live. And eventually, after a few weeks, we arranged to take up rooms in Prescott. There was a couple there. They'd got a house which was too big for them. They'd been glad to get this house, and because they were glad to get any house, because it was so difficult to get hold of. But it was really too big for them. There was plenty of room in it. So they'd advertise in the paper, and we went along to see the place, and eventually we decided to take a couple of rooms in this house. We had 1 bedroom and 1 living room, and we shared the kitchen as regards cooking and all that sort of thing with the family who were in. They were a young couple like ourselves. The name was Mr. Barron, and they had 2 children like us. So eventually we landed there, and we got quite comfortable there after a bit. It was, for one thing, it was just outside the town of Prescott. It wasn't right in the middle, and you'd only got to walk about a couple of 100 yards, and you came to the entrance of a big estate, Knowsley Park it was called, which was owned by the Earl of Derby. Now, it was, of course, this park was private, but there was one thing. There was roads that led through this park and to different parts of the park, and to the hall itself, Knowsley Hall. But he was very decent in some respects, this Lord Derby. For instance, if there was anything going on in the town, like a carnival or anything of that description, he always was good enough to allow the people to use this, and he didn't charge. There was one end of the park that used to be flower shows and agricultural shows, all took place there. Now, there was also deer in this park, and there was also pheasants and different birds like that. And you could write to the agent of Lord Derby for a pass, and this pass allowed you to go into the park for walks, but you had to sign an agreement that you would keep to the paths and that you wouldn't harm any of the birds or animals that were inside. And I wrote for a pass, and on Sunday mornings, again, while Edie was getting the Sunday's dinner ready, I used to take Eileen and Joan into this park for a walk. And of course there was no traffic, and it was right off the high road, not even any motors or anything inside. And it was so nice and quiet that it was really a lovely walk. And at this time too, that while we were living in Cross Street at Mrs. Barron's house, there was one or two things that I think were worthy of note. One of them was that when the wind was in a certain direction, it used to blow smoke down into our living room. And as there was no way, the only way we could stop that happening, because the chimney pot was like a T-shape. And the only way you could stop the smoke from being blown down back into the living room was by stopping one end of this T up when the wind was in a certain direction. And I remember that I used to have to go up on the roof and stuff some old sacking in the side of the chimney pot that were to stop the wind from blowing in from that end. And of course the trouble was, if the wind changed, you had to go up and stick it in the other end. At the finish I got a bit tired of this, and I went to a local builder and asked him how much he'd charge to put a new pot on, because the people we were living with, the Barons, they wouldn't do anything about it. Of course, they were like us, they couldn't afford to do a lot. But anyway, I went to this builder, a jobbing builder he was, and I asked him to do the job and asked him what it would cost. So he said, well, if you let me take that chimney pot, let me have that chimney pot that's on, I'll put your new chimney pot on, and I'll only charge you 10 shillings for putting it on. So, of course, I agreed to that, and we had it done. But when Mr. Barron found out that I'd done this, of course, he wasn't very pleased, but there wasn't much he could do about it, so he had to just put up with it. And the next thing, of course, they didn't have carpets on the floor in those days. They had lino, if you could afford lino. And we couldn't afford lino just at that time when we went into this house of Barron's. So what I did was I stained the floor and polished it. And one day while I was at work, this Mrs. Barron, who lived in the kitchen part of the house, had gone into Edie's part. And of course they'd got friendly together, you see, and especially with both having 2 children. And she tended to go through into your mum's half, into Edie's half, and Well, I think we can start calling it Imam now, that because now we've come to the part where you and Eileen are both beginning to grow up into little girls. But let's get back to this story that I was telling you. She brought one of the youngest of her children in with her, and sat her down on the floor while she was talking to your mother, Mrs. Barron did. Well, they'd been talking for about an hour or so, and then she got up to go, and she lifted her youngest child up, and of course her youngest child had no nappy on, and she'd wet all over the floor, and it had left a big mark where it took all the stain out of the floor where I'd done it. Of course, when I got home at night and saw it, I can tell you I was none too pleased about it, because the whole effect was spoiled. It was at this time that we had our first holiday as a family. We decided to go to New Brighton, which wasn't a long way off. You could go to Liverpool and then get the boat across on the ferry. So we wrote to a place in New Brighton. There's adverts in the local paper, the Liverpool Echo, and we answered one of these adverts, and we got digs for... we were still having the first week in August for our holidays, and it was the same this year. And I remember that we'd still got to have the pram, because Eileen she wasn't old enough to walk far, and so we had to go by train. Otherwise we could have gone on the tram, and it would have been more convenient, because the tram took you right down to the pier head. So what we had to do was walk to the railway station, which was about a mile walk, and then while your mum got into the train with the children, I had to take the pram to the guards van and put it in there. And we got to Liverpool, and then the railway station, there was a good a walk of over a mile from Lime Street to Pier Head. So again we had to push the pram with Eileen in, and suitcases as well, and walk down to the Pier Head, and then we got on the boat to go across to New Brighton. Well, but it was just an ordinary holiday. We enjoyed ourselves. Of course, we had to go in. Your mum and I had to be in early because of you and Joan being young, and to put you to bed by about 8 o'clock. And in the daytime, we spent most of the time on the beach. We were fortunate with regard to rain. With regard to the weather, we didn't have any rain while we were there. We had nice weather, so we were able to go down on the beach every day with the children. Now, I can always remember trying to get Eileen to paddle in the water, and she was very frightened of the water at first, but gradually, by holding her hand, we managed to persuade her to come in along with us. And after the first time of going in, every time we went near the beach, she used to say, "I want to paddle in the water." So she was always wanting to be in the water after that. Again, after the holidays, we had an unpleasant experience uh, I'm talking now in connection with my job. And that was that they were now beginning to get the backlash of the strike that had taken place earlier. And as I told you, the employers were left with the whip hand. We'd only been back to work a week or two when there was a notice board, when there was a notice went up on the notice board which said that on such a date wages would be reduced by 15 shillings per week, and 6 months later they would be reduced by a further 15 shillings. Well, that meant that in 6 months we were going to lose 30 shillings of our wages, and that's what happened. There was nothing we could do about it. The union couldn't go on strike again, they'd no money left, so we just had to accept it. And of course that meant that instead of getting £4.10 a week, after 6 months from this particular date, I was now only getting £3 a week. Now that meant we'd lost a third of our wages, and you can understand what that meant. I mean, we could only just manage as it was with not being in a house of our own, and we were still wanting to buy bits of furniture and build a home up. So this was really a knock. Anyway, nothing we could do about it but put up with it. All this, of course, was making me more interested in trade union affairs and politics. And actually, I'd become the branch president of the Prescott No. 2 branch. Personally, I was always against using strikes as a means of bargaining. I preferred talking and trying to get a settlement without any strikes. Because very often, even when you'd won a strike, you'd suffered heavily in the battle that had taken place. There was one thing with having regular work, we'd been able to buy a new pram for Eileen, and also from the same firm that we bought the pram from, we'd been able to get some lino for the floor, and we'd also bought a gramophone. We'd got this gramophone with 6 records. Another thing that happened about this time was that we began to get radio broadcasting, a thing that was absolutely new. The nearest stations, there was one at Liverpool and one at Manchester, and of course you had to be within range of